A new patch has hit Pokemon Unite, and you know what that means. It's time for me to be the patch cop. I'm the patch cop, and I'm gonna tell you if this patch is illegal or not. Jake, your resident content cowboy here. Yeehaw. Let's talk about Freezing Rush Part 3, because there's an interesting bit to get into about this. And one of the big thoughts is, are a lot of these held items still bad? And what could be done to change that? Well, I guess you have part of the answer right there. Yeehaw. Let's do this thing. So rather than a winners and losers, considering this is a mini patch, there isn't really much to say, except I'll briefly talk about each patch note and what I think it did for them in the metagame. We'll talk about Zeraora first. Obviously, it's a win to get cooldown reduction and to get a shield increase on discharge. It's always hard to say what is going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back with a speedster, and Zeraora is no different. I do think these changes are good, but it will probably keep this Pokemon in sort of the pub stomper realm, where it works really well into uncoordinated games and has some flashes possibly in coordinated. If it's gonna see play in coordinated though, I have to assume it's gonna be with the discharge build still, and maybe that shield's enough, but I think it might need a little bit more. I mean, we saw teams try it at Worlds, so perhaps Zera's back on the menu. Then we have Cinderace. Cinderace is a weird one because it's like, I don't even understand the Blaze Kick change. Like, I do see giving it increased defenses. It's really nice. Like, these are kind of big defenses, especially special defense, going up from 150 to 230. Like, that's a really nice, sizable change for Cinderace. But at the same time, I don't think it's enough to make Blaze Kick a problem where they needed to nerf the cooldown on it. This is a head scratcher, and I don't think it's going to change too much for Cinderace, but it gives it some more viability. And again, this is a Pokemon team, a Pokemon that players have tried to use in some professional capacity, so we'll see. Goodra, cooldown reduction on Power Whip, Acid Spray. There you go. It's a very small cooldown reduction. It's a half a second. It doesn't really move the needle for me at all. Okay. Darkrai. Darkrai is a whole bag of potatoes. It's a whole can of worms. It's a whole thing of the things. And I worry that Darkrai was buffed too hastily and nerfed too slowly, and I think that's what we're still sitting in. Dark Pulse getting a cooldown increase is good, and a damage reduction is good. But all of this across the board, you probably could have tuned this Pokemon like back down to halfway of what they did in the previous buffs, and it would be fair. I understand the need for emergency buffs because this thing was just getting absolutely dumpstered, but I really do think that they didn't do enough to bring it back down to earth. Every time you do see it in a match, it's super annoying. I just played a game with it earlier, and there really isn't much a lot of the roster can do against it. You just are kind of near it and hoping it doesn't target you with its Unite move, because if it does, it's basically an insta KO, and then you can't really target it with a ton of moves. It's just kind of a mess. So I don't think they did enough. Darkrai, the big winner of the patch because of that. But let's talk about the big thing with this patch, and that is the bug fix to Zacian's Unite move. No, I'm kidding. That is the held items adjustment. That are the held items adjustment. The held items adjustments are some of the biggest changes in the patch. Assault Vest, Rocky Helm, Rescue Hood, and then nerfs for Weakness Policy, Rapid Fire Scarf, Slick Spoon. Let's talk about the nerfs first. I don't know the reasoning behind Weakness and Rapid Fire Scarf both receiving a nerf. The only thing I can assume is they were just mainstay items, but I'll talk to you more about Rapid Fire Scarf here in a bit, because I actually think the story with that is interesting now that I've heard what the math court has figured out around that. Weakness Policy, I guess, was giving too much value for non-stacking, and I don't know, they want you to use other things? Okay. I think if anything with Weakness, you could probably buff some other items to make them a little more viable rather than making Weakness a little less viable, but it's possible there were just a few Pokemon that scaled too well off their attack stat for Weakness so that they had to bring it back down to earth a little. Slick Spoon, on the other hand, makes a lot of sense. It's just too good. As an item, it's way too good. It's better than everything else. Slick Spoon is on every special attacker, and you get it. So I understand nerfing this item a bit. The question is, when would you actually remove it? And unfortunately, I think the answer is, I don't know, maybe never. So you get to a point with Slick Spoon where you go, okay, finally you remove it and you definitely go back to choice specs or something like that. But then what have we really accomplished, right? Slick Spoon is interesting because it ignores a portion of special defenses, and in a reality where all of these attackers and Pokemon are getting more special defenses, this item just feels more and more relevant. But the nerf could make it a little less viable. I don't know. It still feels very good. Rapid Fire Scarf is one I want to talk to you about before we talk about the buffs. So I was talking to Evokron over at the Math Court about Rapid Fire Scarf, and I think it's really interesting. So the question I had for Evo was, what changes with this for most of the roster? And I actually have what changes here. I think they're still working on some of it, but let me give you some basics here, and I'll have to throw this up on the screen so you can have it. Alolan Ninetales, essentially nothing changes for A9. Cinderace, you drop 1 bracket at level 5, and let me quickly explain attack speed if you don't know what I'm talking about. So when you get attack speed, it's not just base attack speed, it is a set level of attack speed that brings you to another threshold, and once you hit that threshold, you are attacking faster. Confusing? I know, but that's basically what it is. You're almost stepping up in attack speed, so 5% attack speed doesn't just raise it 5%. It gets your character closer to a threshold that moves it into attacking faster. Enjoy. Enjoy that. So Cinderace, you really only see a change at level 5, and that's basically it. Razorleaf, Decidueye, you see some minor changes at levels 1 to 3 and level 8, so it's basically irrelevant. Dragapult, you see some minor changes, 1 at level 8 and 6 and 7 for Phantom Force. For Dragonite, you do see some changes, level 12 for the Dragon Dance Hyper Beam, and then for Outrage, level 5, 6, 8, and 15. Possibly this is what they were trying to balance, and this is what I'll talk about more here in a sec. Duraludon's really hard to figure out with Flash Cannon. Garchomp, a level 3 and level 8, so basically no change, and no change to its unboosteds. Greninja is irrelevant. There's a change at 9. Hoopa, interestingly enough, changes at level 4, 5, 7, 12, and 13. Venusaur changes at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Snorlax Flail changes at 4, 5, 7, 12, and 13. So what am I saying here? What I'm saying is, at all of these levels, they actually are attacking slower than they would be before the change. Most Pokemon are unaffected. Serena has a change at 5 and 11. Zoroark has a change at 12 and 13 if you're running 2 attack speed items. So the big thought here is, this change actually affects Pokemon like Hoopa, Flaillax, and Venusaur, who are not normally running items like this, and doesn't really affect a lot of the auto attackers. So if you're worried that this is a nerf to a lot of the ADC Pokemon, it really is not. So there you go. A long explanation just to say this Rapid Fire Scarf doesn't seem to change much in the meta right now. I'll let you know if they get more information. But what it really seems to do is kind of affect Pokemon that they may not have originally intended to use attack speed items on. All right, moving on to some of our buffs. We have buffs for Assault Vest, Rocky Helm, and Rescue Hood. I'm still waiting for them to math out Rescue Hood, but the early word is it's a fine change, but you actually are probably still running similar items on a lot of the Pokemon you expect, and it works better, of course, for Pokemon that probably were already running it, like Comfey or something like that. And then Rocky Helm is just bad, unfortunately. It is a bad item, and it's not because of the change to the max HP damage, which is kind of irrelevant, it feels like, but it is because of how this item activates. I have a video of this on my channel, but basically the way Rocky Helm works is you take a set amount of damage, 10% of your max HP in a single attack, and then you emit a very small area around you. It kind of looks like smoke, kind of moving out from around you, about the area radius of Thunderbolt from Pikachu, and you do damage in that area, and that has a 2-second cooldown. Sound confusing? That's because it is, and it's dumb, and I'm sorry, but this item is just a mess. They would have to kind of rework Rocky Helmet for it to be a thing, and I don't think they're gonna do that. So I don't know what they want from this. If this was just an item that reflected a base amount of damage when you were taking physical damage or something like that, kind of like Rough Skin from Garchomp, at least you could make an argument for it, and you would sort of like make a beeline for brawlers and just try to stay in their face. But in general, Rocky Helm is still a bit of a mess. Now we have Assault Vest, and I actually think Assault Vest is probably the nicest change here for all of the held items, maybe besides Slick Spoon because it's just nuts. But Assault Vest now gives you 20% of your HP as a damage mitigation tool against special attackers. I think you could see this now played, especially in draft games. Real idea behind it is you find either one or two Pokemon on the enemy team running special attack that you want to specifically negate their damage, or they have a lot of special attackers, and this item just has a ton of uptime where you are tanking a ton of their damage. Of course, you will be running this on Pokemon with a lot of HP, but in general, the interesting thing about this patch is it feels like it buffed 3 items that were used oftentimes by players who had a low amount of information. So Rocky Helm and Assault Vest specifically sound really good and haven't been that great in play. And then Rescue Hood is just kind of a mess. But all 3 of these items are often run by your allies who don't know that much about what's going on. So it's interesting to me that a few patches ago we saw Leftovers buffed, and now we are seeing Rocky Helm and Assault Vest buffed. Shell Bell as well, which got a lot of play but did not seem to be as viable as other options. I actually think changes like this are cool because it makes a less viable item not so trolling when you're running it, but I still don't think it's going to make some of these a super meta pick. So that's my overall thought on this patch. I think a lot of these items are probably still not good, while the nerfed items are probably still very good. However, Assault Vest might rise, especially when you are able to see the enemy team in draft mode. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I love you guys, and I will see you all next time. We did it. Oh, and shout out to Evo and the math cord. You guys are the best.